session. So if you'll stay on mute for us, we'll get started in just a moment. If you're just joining us, we're just giving it a few minutes to admit everybody into our session today. So if you'll stay on mute, that'll help us out. And we'll get started in just a moment. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're allowing a few more people into the Zoom breakout. If you are in the Whova app, you might notice in the chat space or in the Q&A that we've requested that if you want to participate in a breakout session today, which our session does have time for a breakout session, if you would join via the Zoom link, that'll allow you to be a part of the interactivity. If you, for whatever reason, are absolutely unable to join Zoom, we have another solution for you that we'll work on. So we'll get started in just a moment, and you may hear me repeat that message before we begin. It's great to see everyone joining. We have several more people still in the waiting room, I think, so we're just going to give it a little bit more time and then we'll get started. So just like when we're at the real Engage OK, we're just waiting to allow people time to transition from their sessions and from lunch. So we'll get started in just a moment. If you'll stay on mute, it'll allow us to quickly get folks into the session today. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and begin. First of all, I want to start by saying welcome to everyone to the session on strategies for identifying and evaluating open education resources. My name is Tiffany Neal, and I am the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction at the State Department of Education. I have some wonderful folks who are joining us for the presentation today. My co-presenter for today is Becky Morales. And Becky, would you like to unmute and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Rebecca Morales. I am new to the State Department. I am the Director of Instructional Materials and Library Media.
Thank you. And Becky has been with us just for a few weeks, and she's already jumping in and doing some wonderful things. So we also have Christine Kerner with us today, who's helping us host the session. Christine is our Director of Secondary Mathematics. So you'll see her in the chat box responding to questions and sharing some information throughout the day. If this is your first time joining one of the OSDE Engage OK sessions, I just want to say welcome and also suggest to you that in today's session, we will have a breakout opportunity where you'll get a chance to talk with other educators from our state about the topics we'll be exploring today. So if you are in the Whova app, we would recommend that you join via Zoom, and I believe Christine and Becky are going to post some links and some information about how you can join Zoom rather than the Whova app today in the chat spaces, both in Zoom and in Whova. They'll place those links. Just as we do in education, we steal, borrow, and beg for good ideas from other educators. And a colleague of mine, Levi Patrick, ran a session this morning, and I thought he did a really nice job of explaining to folks how they can at least become engaged in the conversations through Zoom today. And so here's a picture of Levi with his daughter, but you'll notice that there are a couple of areas highlighted that are good pieces of information for you to know as you navigate Zoom today. The first is that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom link where it has a little icon for participants and an icon for chat. Those will become the most important features for you to use in Zoom today. With the participant feature, if you click on that, you should see your name, and you can rename yourself if you are currently represented in the Zoom chat as maybe someone else because you're borrowing their computer, or maybe your name isn't spelled correctly, whatever the case may be. You can change your name to display here in our Zoom session today just by going to the participants, clicking more and renaming. Also, under the participants list, you'll see several features for how you can interact in the session today. If you click on that, you'll see things like raise hand, yes, no, go slower, go faster, and a couple of other features. So just to do a check so I can see as a presenter if you're able to interact with those features, give me a yes if the volume is good for you, or if I need to turn up my volume so you can hear a little better. So just click the yes check mark with green under your participants list, and that'll let us know that you are hearing me okay and that you understand how to use the participant feature. So I see a lot of green check marks coming up. If it's a no for you, of course, you can click no with the red circle and the X, and that'll let us know that you can't hear me very well today. And then, of course, the chat feature, we're going to use that throughout, and we're going to start by asking you to introduce yourself in the chat box of Zoom or in Whova. Let us know who you are and where you're from and what grade level you teach. That'll be a great way to introduce yourself to others on the Zoom call today. Great, we're already seeing some folks in the chat introduce themselves, so we know that's working well. How's it going on the Whova side, Becky, okay? Great, I see a thumbs up from Becky. You'll notice that we're taking quite a bit of time to orient ourselves to the technology today. If you or your school are looking at distance learning as an option at any point in the school year for your students or connecting with your families, we would encourage you to take that time up front to really work to ensure people are able to connect with the technology in the way that you intended. You're also going to see throughout the session today, we are going to interact with technology and do our best to give explicit instructions, repeat instructions, provide you multiple avenues to link to the features that we're talking about today. If we're going to ask you to go to a link, we may put it in the chat 2, 3, 5, maybe 6 times. And those are all strategies we would encourage you to use with students or families if you're interacting through the virtual format. One time of sharing something is just not enough in this virtual setting. Multiple opportunities for people to see how they should be connected, and explicit guidance becomes very important. So we'll try to strike a balance today so that we can move through our session, but also ensure everyone is connected and following along and engaged together. And Christine, if you'll do me a favor, since you're the host, and if you'll turn off the feature that allows for annotation, that'll help us out on our slides today. All right, a couple of other virtual norms for us today in our workshops. If you'll stay muted during the large group sessions, that would help us out a lot. But when we do go to breakout sessions, if you would unmute so there's a little more natural interactivity and discussions, that would be helpful. We ask that you put any of your questions in the chat boxes, either for Whova or Zoom. Again, we're recommending that everyone move over to Zoom if they can, rather than Whova. And again, Becky can put that in information about that in the Whova chat for you.
Tiffany, I believe, sorry to interrupt you, but I believe since you're sharing your screen, you're the one who needs to turn off the annotations. So in the main menu, next to annotate, you should have the option of disabling annotations.
Okay, so do I hit clear?
Clear all, yep.
All right, and then I don't see the disable option, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Is there an option that only the host is allowed to annotate or something to that effect?
I don't see that, so we'll just kind of move along. And if we accidentally have some annotations, then we'll clear those up.
Okay.
So again, if you all would help us out today, we're doing our best with technology features, but you're going to see us interact in a way that it's probably something that you may have to do as you're hosting virtual sessions for your students. So back to the norms, we want to make sure that you're present and participating. So if you'll do us a favor and just turn off your email or social media platforms, unless you're using the social media platform to interact with other colleagues during this session, we ask that you turn that off at this time so you can really be present for the session. And you'll notice that throughout the presentation, there will be these little icons that show up that represent what we hope represent the chat box feature. So anytime you see that feature on a slide, we're asking you to be intentional about responding in the chat box as it relates to whatever's on that slide. And then also it is really helpful for us as presenters to see people on the screen. Otherwise it feels like you are speaking to a void and you don't get any interactivity. So if you have the capability to turn on your video, we would greatly appreciate that. That'll help us feel more connected to you today. So that's just a couple of norms for you there. We are going to use both Zoom and Google Documents today as our technology features for interactivity. And so we'll walk through a lot of features related to both of those pieces of technology for interaction today, and hope that you'll be able to use them as well if you have at any point interaction through a distance learning model with students. A few of our session goals today, we're going to explore the characteristics of high quality open education resources, and we're going to spend some time evaluating open education resources, specifically looking at tools that'll help you evaluate those resources. We're also going to discuss several of the projects we have going on in Oklahoma right now related to supporting our Oklahoma educators with open education resources. And lastly, we're going to share a slew of resources and places where you can find some open education resources to support your instruction, your curriculum and instruction this year. So let's start here. And this is our first test of interactivity in the chat with our icon feature here. When you think of open education resources for instruction, we'd love to hear what you think of. So in the chat box, if you'll just respond to this short question, we'll see sort of where everyone's at in the way that they think about open education resources. And Aaron and Stacy, thanks for, or Aaron, thanks for starting us out here. You'll see Aaron just responded with free. So if you would, share anything that you think of related to what open education resources are. We see a lot of free technology resources in the chat box, online and readily available. We see some specific spaces like Teachers Pay Teachers, resources that are accessible to all teachers, vetted resources, community access. Yeah, we'll just give it just a few more seconds to see if others have thoughts about what they think about when they think about open education resources. Wonderful. Well, just so you know, my background in education is that I started as a science and English teacher at an alternative school in Veneta, Oklahoma. And then I spent the better part of my teaching career teaching both middle school and high school science with some experience in elementary science instruction. So my background primarily is science, and you may have heard of a term in education called STEM education. And that term for many people means so many different things. And we're in a space now where open education resources really mean so many different things to so many people. So we're going to do our best to try to narrow down for our purposes today, the way that we think about or we talk about open education resources. So for us today, we're going to use the Hewlett Foundation's definition of open education resources. And they share with us that open education resources, or OERs, are freely available high quality learning materials that can be downloaded, edited, and shared to better serve all students. That's an important point here when we're talking about OERs. Not everything that is free and available on the internet really serves the purpose for us as classroom teachers to be editable in a way where we can edit it and then share like more freely online. There's a whole process that's utilized for publishing resources that can be modified or changed for the purposes of then sharing them more broadly. And that's through a process called Creative Commons. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But not everything that is on the internet would necessarily be categorized as an OER curriculum that we're going to talk about today. So we'll kind of walk through those definitions a little bit more. But is it editable? Can you share it freely with other teachers and students? And then the other piece of the definition I want us to pay attention today is it high quality? How do we know it's high quality? There are so many different learning material types that fit under the category of instructional materials or OERs in general. It could be individual units or lessons, supplemental resources, full curriculum, district created materials or resources, online courses, or teacher created materials. We thought it might be interesting to share with you of all the instructional materials that are broadly being utilized today across the nation. A recent study showcased that 19% of all instructional materials are being utilized are open education resources. 51% are commercial materials, and 66% are developed by teachers or schools or school staff. So let's talk a little bit more just about high quality instruction or curriculum and what the research says about this. So not specifically to OER, but what do we know about the quality of instructional materials and the impact they have on students? The New Teacher Project shares with us through one of their studies that in a single school year, the average student spends 581 of 720 available hours on assignments that are not high quality, which usually means those materials are not highly aligned to the standards for that state. And the reason we say this is because we know that over the last 10 years, many of the academic standards for English language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, and beyond, they're now intentionally emphasizing that students gain the disciplinary practices as well as the content. So when instructional materials focus primarily on rote memorization of content or short responses from students about the content or teachers delivering the content and excluding students from opportunities to really engage intentionally in critical thinking as it pertains to that discipline or that content, we know that those materials tend to be less aligned to the standards. And so I think that's why we see a statistic like this show up from the New Teacher Project. We also know that improving the quality of curriculum is 40 times more cost effective than class size reduction. Now that's a big thing for us to think about. There are actually several studies that showcase this sort of phenomenon. And so I want you to think about all the times that you've worked really, really, really hard to provide instruction to students, and you've utilized the curriculum provided, or you may have developed your own materials. A lot of times we can, well, most of the time we're working really, really hard as teachers to implement that curriculum without knowing that that curriculum may not be highly aligned to our learning objectives and the goals for student learning. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can strategize or a process that you can utilize to really determine if your curriculum is well aligned and high quality. Because as we can see here, it has a huge impact on student learning, maybe more so than other aspects of the work we do in our classrooms. Another statistic that Becky shared with me was that effective curricula costs on average no more than weak curriculum. So it is all about the curriculum we're choosing, whether it's free or cost, the quality of that curriculum really does matter. And we have to look closely at how well the curriculum is aligned to our learning goals. Here's another point related to the quality of curriculum and student populations that ineffective or non-high quality curriculum can really impact the most. So several studies share with us that inconsistent access to aligned materials impacts student learning in schools across the country, but it particularly hits schools that have a higher proportion of low income and students of color the most, perpetuating inequities in the system. So curriculum really does matter. It's one of the biggest tools we have as educators to make an impact positively on student academic success and just student development as learners. So how much time are teachers spending on curriculum development? Now I'm going to share with you the average amount of time that teachers are spending. I'm sure there are many of you on the line today that have felt like, especially in the last several months, you've spent a lot more time than this, but this was a study conducted a few years ago that said teachers are spending on average 12 hours per week creating instructional materials. They're heading online to supplement or piece together curriculum. So we want to know from you in the chat box, why do you think this is happening? Why do you think so many teachers across the nation and in Oklahoma are spending this amount of time creating or supplementing their curriculum? What are things you've experienced or other teachers have experienced? We already see some folks in the chat box sharing some thoughts here. Yeah, we see some comments about the curriculum not being well aligned, standards changing and that causing misalignment, not having curriculum that does a great job at differentiation for our students. So we're always going online and looking for ways that we can supplement and support diverse learners. Outdated printed textbooks. You're finding in your curriculum that the learning experiences aren't really meaningful for students. So you're trying to find new resources to engage students in that way. Lots of reasons why we as educators supplement our existing curriculum. And I think we have to do a better job of sharing the story about how important well-aligned, high-quality curriculum is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more today as well. Thank you so much for your chat responses. Please keep those coming. So where are teachers turning online for curriculum or instructional materials? This may not surprise you, but of the teachers going online for curricular materials, 97% are just Googling. They're finding individual lessons or some form of a curriculum there. 79% teachers pay teachers, 85% Pinterest, and 39% Engage New York, which is a free and open curriculum developed a few years ago for English language arts and mathematics. So I think that speaks to the trend of a curriculum like Engage New York, that it is showing up as the 4th on the list of places where teachers are going to find curriculum. You know, as a side note, Becky again shared some wonderful research with me related to even some of these online spaces. So she shared that in an analysis of the top 500 elementary math pins on Pinterest, she shared in the study how many of what percentage of resources on Pinterest were actually well aligned to standards or cognitively demanding for students. So let me ask you this and respond in the chat box. What percent in this study of elementary math activities found on Pinterest do you believe was well aligned or cognitively demanding for students? You have a large range of 0 to 1%. What percent of materials do you think are well aligned or cognitively demanding? And this is for elementary math. So we see a lot of lower numbers. I don't think anyone's hit the jackpot just yet. So I'll share it with you. Some of you are really close. It's 2%. 2% of all elementary math pinned resources were found to be cognitively demanding at the grade level for the learning goals for students. 2%. Which means we have to do a lot of work as teachers to vet these materials that we have available to us that are so freely available to us. There are currently studies being done in some of these other areas like Teachers Pay Teachers and Google's a little harder to do, but teachers pay teachers is something that a current study is looking at. So we'll try to keep you posted on that as we find out from that particular research study. And I noticed that Brittany said majority are probably not created by educators. That could be, and it's hard to tell in a space like that, who has the experience and how much experience they may have. So there are a few risks we want to consider as teachers, as administrators, when we're thinking about bringing in open education resources into our curriculum development process or supplementing our current curriculum. And here are three risks to sort of be aware of. And these risks come from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics in their position paper on open education resources. But we see these same three themes across all disciplines as far as things that we should be aware of when we're thinking about bringing OERs as a focus into our curriculum selection. So there's a concern that the process of vetting and adoption agreed on will be abandoned. And what that's talking about is in a school district, if every teacher is on their own looking for their own materials, you lose out on that opportunity to bring teachers together to review curriculum and determine what's best for consistency for the district and for students in the district. As you can imagine, the resources will vary widely, reinforcing inequities in situations where students who struggle are more likely to have inexperienced teachers. So we know that's a true statistic, that a lot of our students who are most at risk often end up in courses with teachers who have been teaching fewer amounts of years. And so now imagine if the curriculum for those students, if it's solely on that first or second year teacher to develop the curriculum, and how that can be problematic. The third point, the third sort of risk with OERs that we have to be aware of is around the lack of coherence. So what do we mean by that? What we mean is we know that students learn best by having lessons that build progressively in a unit or over the course of a year, where those ideas are building one on top of the other, or where students see connections between something they learned 2 weeks ago and something that they're learning today. So oftentimes when districts or teachers move completely to OERs, it can be really difficult to maintain that coherence. So that's certainly something you want to keep in mind as you're thinking about selecting OERs. And I see Tiffany Thompson talking about chopped lessons with no flow. That's exactly what we're talking about with the lack of coherence. So how do we mitigate these risks? We're going to share with you 3 strategies to mitigate these risks, and we're going to walk through some resources that we hope will help you mitigate these risks. So the 3 things we're going to focus on for mitigating the risks associated with using OERs is to focus first on alignment and the focus of the standards. Alignment might make sense to you. What we mean there is, does the lesson, the unit, the curriculum you're selecting, is it well aligned to the learning goals of the standards? But the focus piece is another important part. So is what you're selecting truly focusing on the learning goals, or do you have extraneous materials or extraneous components of the lesson that don't really focus on that standard? Are you spending a lot of time with students on things that don't really solely target that learning goal? The other thing we're going to take a look at is coherence, which we've talked about a little bit. And then the third mitigating risk is ensuring that that your curriculum is equitable for all students, or the lessons you're choosing are equitable for all students. So here's where we're going to engage in a little bit of interactivity in our breakout sessions. I already mentioned to you that my background is science, so our example today is going to come from a science example, but we want you to have a chance to analyze an OER lesson that we pulled from one of the sites mentioned earlier. And the lesson itself says that it is aligned to this standard. So we want to give you a chance to look at the standard, understand the learning goals associated with the standard, and then analyze the lesson with a group of teachers or other educators on the session today. And you tell us, how well aligned is that lesson to the standards? To get you oriented to a science standard, this is an example of one of our new science standards that were adopted this last year. This is a 5th grade standard. We know because it says 5 over here on the far left-hand side. Where it says 5 PS1-1, That is the actual standard. Develop a model to describe that matter is made of particles too small to be seen. In the science standards, you have a little additional information to help you understand the goals of the standard. The clarification statement and the assessment boundary hopefully provide you a little additional information. One particular area on this standard you'll want to pay attention to as you're doing your evaluation is the disciplinary core idea box in the middle that's orange. These are those science ideas or science concepts that we really want a lesson to be targeted to if it's aligned to this standard. So Becky's going to walk you through how we are going to try to facilitate a breakout session. And for those of you that are not on Zoom and not able to access the breakout session, we'll have another option for you. So Becky?
Okay, all right, so Christine, there we go. You will notice what we're going to do is put a link in the chat, and we will put it in the Whova chat as well for you to access a Google slide file. When you are in that file, and you'll be in breakout rooms, you will notice the number of your breakout room. That will allow you to pick your group number. So for example, if you are in breakout room 2, then you would be within group 2. Christine's screen sharing now what that Google file looks like. So if you'll go to slide 3, you can see that is where you will select, and you just click on that number of group number that corresponds with your breakout room, and it will take you directly to your slide. Within each slide, you will see directions for your group to review a lesson and discuss it, and you may document it within that slide. Time allocated allows some time for independent review of about 5 minutes, and the remaining 10 minutes of time that you are in your breakout room, please be discussing with one another and exchanging your ideas. Make sure that everybody will be able to have a role when you get there, so you can have someone who is recording and someone who is keeping track of the time. And I think that's pretty much it. Are there any questions? Put in the chat if you have any directions about this.
I just want to make sure, Christine, let's go ahead and share the breakout group document first. And then for those that are staying in the session, we're going to give you specific directions in just a moment. I'm sorry, people who are not able to go in the breakout session, we're going to give you some specific directions in a moment. So Christine and Christine is going to share a link to the document that is on the screen right now, which is your breakout discussion group board. And then in just a minute, you're going to get a signal that you are being placed in a breakout group and what number, and that will tell you, as Becky said, if you go to slide 3 of the discussion board, and let's say I'm group 2, if I click on group 2, it's going to take me to my group 2 slide.
I've also placed it in the Whova chat for those of you that are on Whova.
All right, so Christine's going to put us into breakout groups. You'll also get a signal when time is getting close. So make sure you have a good facilitator and timekeeper who are helping you out. Again, those who don't make it into breakout rooms, if you'll stay in the main, you'll be staying in the main chat with us, main room with us, and we'll walk through a different process to do this. Christine, is it still pushing some people? Yeah, okay, we'll just give it a few more minutes. We would love for everyone to join a breakout group if you can, if you get that notification. Otherwise, there may be someone who ends up in a breakout group all alone. So we want to make sure if you do get that signal to go to a breakout group, if you would please do that. All right, still waiting on some folks to make it into the breakout group. Stacy and Jennifer, we see your comments in just a moment. We're going to get to those.
Okay, we should have everybody in breakout rooms who got the invite. Some haven't joined, but we should have at least or two people in each room, hopefully. I just got a request for help, so I'm gonna jump to that breakout room, but I'll be back.
Great. I'll facilitate the discussion here. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, for those that are staying in the breakout group, what I'd like for you to do, I'm gonna share with you a link to the actual lesson. And you can take a moment to look through that lesson. It's now in the chat box. The other thing I want to share with you is a link to the standard, information about how you can get back to the standard. So you can look at the lesson side by side with the standard. And if you'll take about 5 minutes and do that level of review, and then we're going to, as a larger group here in the main room, we're going to facilitate a discussion about how well aligned the lesson is or isn't to the standard goals. And I see a few of you are unable to go to the links. Is that because you can't access them in the Zoom chat? You can respond to me in the Zoom chat. Or are you in the Whova, maybe? Can't access them in the Zoom chat. Usually, if you are in the chat box and you click on the link, it should take you to the link. For some of you, you might need to right-click on the link. Francie, I see your comment. It's okay if you didn't make it into the breakout room. We'll stay in the large group. And I'm gonna resend the link as requested by a few people. So again, if you'll take a moment to review this 5th grade lesson, I just put a link to that lesson in the chat box. And you can take a look at the 5th grade standard that it corresponds to with those directions. How are we doing, Christine?
We're great. We just had more than 20 groups, so, but we're good.
Oh, good. For those of you that are unable to access the chat, if you'll do us a favor and maybe listen in when we have the conversations related to the alignment and the way that other teachers are seeing it, we hope you'll get some utility there.
Tiffany,
also,
could I ask that you share a screen, capture the screen of the lesson for some people that aren't able to access it? Perhaps we could have that live here for a minute.
Sure. How's that, Levi?
Yep, that's what I needed. Thank you.
So I'll just slowly scroll through this. So you can see some of the key concepts listed here. I'm going to go on down a little bit here. Right, so once you've got a feel for that, I'm actually going to go to some aspects of the lesson and move past materials and cleanup and such. All right, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit more here so you can get a feel for this lesson. All right, maybe a little bit more. I'm going to scroll a little further down, specifically to this piece of the lesson. And then one more piece of the lesson, and we'll show the screen with the standard. All right, let's take a look back at the standard. And hopefully you got a glimpse of the lesson and can sort of compare it to the learning goals of the standard here.
By my calculations, we have about 10 minutes remaining. Groups. I don't know if you set a timer though.
I think we gave them 10 minutes total.
Oh, because
Or did Becky say?
Becky had said 5 and then 10. So
great.
If you'd like me to shorten it to 5, I can. But I just broadcast that they had about 10 minutes left.
That's fine. That's fine. For everyone who's in our main session now, if you would, here are the 2 questions we'd love for you to begin to answer in the chat box if you can. And then we'll talk about it as a large group when folks come back in. So the first question is the lesson well aligned, partially aligned, or not aligned to the standard? Explain your reasoning. So if you want to respond in the chat box with A1, that'll let us know you're responding to that first question there. And if you would like for me to go back to the lesson, just let me know in the chat and I can navigate between both the lesson and the standard for you.
Someone requested to go back to the lesson.
Great. I'll go back to the top of the lesson, Sharon. Again, you can take a look at the key concepts. So again, if you have a copy of the lesson and you have a link to the standard, you can begin to really think about, is this lesson well aligned or partially aligned? And for those of you who are staying in the main session, I'm just going to put a link to the standards document. That may be a little easier for you. If you'll give me just a moment. We're seeing some responses coming in for A1. Thank you so much for that. We'll put question 2 in the chat box in just a moment. Question 2 on deck. Let me stop sharing for just a moment so I can post question 2 in the chat. Question 2 asks, are there things that are not well aligned? Explain your reasoning. And again, you can respond now with A2 corresponding to question 1. So answer 2 corresponding to question 1. I'm sorry, question 2. All right, Christine, does it say how much time we have left?
We have a little less than 5 minutes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So again, if you haven't already thought about what things may be not well aligned in the lesson, we'd love for you to do that and respond with Q2 in the chat. Thank you for those of you who are responding. We'll get a chance to share more broadly as a group in just a moment. We're somewhat like our students though, we want to know the answers, so we'll definitely make sure we have a discussion on this. I see that we have someone in the chat who had trouble accessing the hyperlink. So I want to make sure you have access to both the lesson and a way to get to the standards document so you can look at that alignment. So you can participate in our discussion in just a moment.
Okay, all groups should be back in about 30 seconds.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Christine. Christine, are we back seeing my screen now?
Yes, we are. We can see the Google slides, so you may just want to go to present.
Great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we should have the whole group joining us back in just a few seconds.
I believe we're all back.
Wonderful. So you just had an opportunity, and I apologize for those of you that may have struggled in your breakout rooms, but we can actually see that several of the breakout groups were able to have some pretty robust discussions regarding the alignment of this lesson to the 5th grade standard that we showcased. So we want to talk about that just a little bit, so those of you who maybe weren't able to engage in the discussion can see some of those discussions. I want to remind us that the actual science, the science ideas or the science content that we would want a lesson that's aligned to this particular 5th grade standard to support students in gaining are these 2 disciplinary core ideas or science core ideas on the screen. So with teaching this, teaching students anything to help support them in gaining understanding related to this standard, we'd want them to walk away with these 2 pieces of understanding. Matter of any type can be subdivided into particles that are too small to see, but even then the matter still exists and can be detected by other means. A model showing that gases are made from matter particles that are too small to see and are moving freely around in space can explain many observations, including the inflation and shape of a balloon, the effects of air on larger particles or objects. So in our breakout groups, I'm just gonna share a few of the responses from groups here. So in group 1, it looks like they just documented that the standard deals mainly with gas. Group 2 believe that the activity is aligned, it's hands-on, provides demonstrations. Group 3, the lesson is arranged in a 5E and we think it's aligned throughout. So group 4 actually says that this standard is about understanding some particles, that some particles are too small to be seen, but it appears that the activities address states of matter and not really focused on the goals of this standard. Group 5 documented quite a few things here. Students should be able to model the behavior due to the attraction of the atoms. It shows the lesson seems to focus on student understanding, but doesn't call for students to actually model, which is a goal of the standard. So they're saying that it's mostly aligned, but needs to take steps further. Group 7 is saying partially aligned. And again, that the lesson seems to focus more on the states of matter than particles are too small to be seen. And we see a few other groups who commented that the lesson is partially aligned. So let's go back again to the main learning goals. And I just want to give you an idea of what a group of 5th grade teachers that we pulled together who analyzed the standards, this standard, thought that would showcase what students should be able to do by the end of learning aligned to this standard. So here are examples of proficiency with 5PS1-1. It's really students showcasing that they understand that things that they can't see are made of particles too small to be seen. So here we see maybe a student could showcase for us that a little girl blowing on a dandelion, that there are air particles that you can't see, but it's here in the model and shows that the student understands that those particles are there. In the same way that a student might draw little dots on a balloon or dots inside of a basketball. So guess what? That's the main learning goal here at 5th grade for this standard. It really is about students being able to model this concept in a variety of different spaces where they might interact with an object that is made of particles that are too small to be seen, or air moving objects, the air being too small to be seen. So the actual lesson provided, it has some aspects of the lesson that are well aligned, but here's the trick. Most of that lesson is extraneous to the goals of this learning objective, which means I as a teacher could spend a lot of time doing the full lesson, and really only a small part of it supports students in gaining that standard or that understanding. So now think about that for a moment, especially in this coming year where we know we have to be really focused in our instruction because of other things that students and we as teachers may be dealing with. It becomes vital for us to take a real critical look at the curriculum we're choosing, the lessons we're pulling offline. And if any of those materials are not focused and really aligned to that standard goal, we could be spending a lot of time that we don't really have focused on extraneous learning experiences that are not focused on the standards. So how do you ensure that the lessons are aligned and well focused? It really starts by digging into your standards and learning absolutely everything you can about those expectations. It also means knowing what comes before and after your standards so you know what to focus on. Many of the concepts from this 5th grade lesson related to how molecules interact, that's at a middle school level. So I, as a 5th grade teacher, would be spending a lot of time focusing on something that really those students are supposed to get at middle school. It also depends on us as teachers deeply understanding the concepts. I know I put you all in a little bit of disequilibrium if you don't teach science or you don't feel extremely comfortable with science. But for whatever subject area you teach, it becomes vital for you to become really intimately knowledgeable about the concepts related to that discipline. So again, you know fully, and you can sort of tell with these materials what is focused and well aligned and meeting your purpose or your goals. I'm sure all of us have experienced this. We can find things online that say they're well aligned to something, or we even hear praise from other teachers. But unless we get in and we really investigate, almost like a PhD in alignment of our curriculum here, we may really be spinning our wheels and spending a lot of time focused on things that are not on our grade level learning objectives and not supporting students in the learning of those standards. So here are a couple of resources we wanted to share with you, ways that you can really dig into your standards at grade level, understand what those goals are so that you can better determine if the OER resources or curriculum you're pulling in to use are really well aligned. So if you haven't seen the Oklahoma curriculum frameworks, I know Christine and Becky are going to put a link to this in the chat box here. A link to this webpage will take you to all of the curriculum frameworks we have available right now for math, English, language arts, science, and social studies. We're currently developing out other areas, including fine arts, and we will be developing out physical education and health. But if you take a look at any one of these curriculum frameworks, what we've done is we've worked with teachers around the state to do exactly what we did today. They really thought deeply about what is the intent of that standard and how can we break that down or unpack it for other teachers. So we're going to take a look at the math curriculum frameworks here, maybe 4th grade. And if you click on the 4th grade math curriculum frameworks, if you want to know more deeply what that standard is really about, go to the objective analysis, and here's a list of all the 4th grade standards, and click on a standard. So Christine, why don't you share a little bit about what's here for teachers that helps them better understand the intent of the math standards?
Sure. For each grade level, pre-K through Algebra 2, we have these objective analyses that really breaks down and dives deeper into the meaning behind each of our objectives for the Oklahoma Academic Standards. And so you'll start by seeing an in a nutshell, which is just a summary of that objective in layman's terms so that you know what's being taught. And then we have our student actions, what you would expect students to be doing to really engage with that objective. Teacher actions, how you can help support students in their learning. Some key understandings or takeaways that students will leave, and when they are mastering the standards, they will have those key understandings and be able to apply them to future learnings. And then some common misconceptions. So things we notice students struggle with when they are embarking on the journey of learning that particular objective or thought. And so all of these objective analyses, like I said, we have them for every single objective that's a part of our Oklahoma Academic Standards for Mathematics.
Thank you, Christine. So I mentioned a moment ago that you can find objective analysis or something similar now for all 4 of these subject areas: English, language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. So you can have a better idea of the intent of the standards and really determine if the curriculum you're using or the open education resources you're bringing in are truly aligned, or if you're spending a lot of time maybe focusing on things that are less well aligned. We all know that many of our traditional instructional materials, they might have chapters and chapters in a textbook of things that are not focused on our grade level. The same is true in the OER space. Remember, the second thing you can do besides becoming intimately familiar with your standards and unpacking them by taking a look at these objective analysis through the curriculum frameworks is to really know what comes before or after the learning objectives at your grade level. So we have some materials available for you, mostly through the curriculum frameworks, that will help you understand what comes before your grade and after your grade with a specific discipline. And you can find those links here. If we take a look pretty quickly at the English example that's linked here, the literacy progressions, we can go to any one of the elements listed here and begin to see what this particular topic, literary elements, how it progresses across the pre-K through 12 timeline in standards. So you can have a better idea of what comes before you and after you in the grade level that you teach. And lastly, the best thing we can do to really be able to evaluate our curriculum materials well is to understand the concepts or the content really deeply. So we've provided a few resources here for math, for English language arts, and for science that would help you become really intimately familiar with the content. For social studies, we would highly recommend that you focus on the materials provided in the social studies curriculum frameworks in the objective analysis portion. That'll give you a good idea of the content. So it's not only important to focus on alignment and focused efforts with your instruction, but coherence is vitally important. We talked about coherence a little earlier. Remember, that's the idea of building lessons progressively in a way where it helps students build understanding or make connections to other lessons that you're doing throughout the year. What we find is that many of the open education resources, they're increasingly available, but as someone mentioned earlier, teachers are pulling those down and sort of piecemealing curriculum, and that coherence is lacking. Because again, teachers are spending a lot of time just finding lessons. We also find that it's vitally important to talk to your colleagues, like we got a chance to today in our breakout sessions, to check your level of understanding about, is the lesson aligned, or is it, does it make sense in the progression of learning for students over the course of the year if I place it here at the beginning, in the middle, or the end? So here's a little activity we would encourage you to do with other teachers, either virtually or in person if you come together at the beginning of the year. You can take the lessons that you're thinking about for your curriculum for the year, or take the curriculum you currently have and create cards or strips of papers with the topics of those lessons or units. Post the strips in the order that they appear, or post the cards in the order that they appear in the scope and sequence for your year, and then focus on these questions to facilitate a discussion. What lesson sequence helps students make the most sense here? What lessons are extraneous? Are there any lessons that are out of order? Are there any lessons missing? And how might lessons connect across the year? Here's an example of what this could look like if you do this work with other teachers or yourself. And this is an example of second grade science, where a couple of teachers came together and thought about what are the ideas or the lessons we're teaching and how are those connected. Now, what you'll see here is it doesn't look like a linear model. It looks more like a web. And the reason it looks more like a web is because these teachers saw so many opportunities to connect students to other aspects of learning throughout the year, which we know is a promising feature for student learning. Again, give it a try, either by yourself or with a group of teachers. It's better if you can do it with a group of teachers to really figure out that scope and sequence that makes the most sense for student learning. The scope and sequence that makes the most sense for student learning may not be what's presented in the OER materials or the curriculum that you're using. So you really have to think deeply about that. The other thing we want to do to mitigate risks of open education resources is to focus on the equity of those resources. So just quickly as a reminder, I think many of us know this, that learning really happens sort of when neurons make connections. So the brain, for our students, the brain structures need to be activated to pay attention to new information that they're presented. So that's where we get the engagement piece, is what you're presenting to students in your lesson or your curriculum, is it causing them to activate past learning? And then the new learning that comes into play has to be connected to that existing knowledge. And that in many ways can cause students to feel a little sort of discombobulated in their learning. If what you're presenting doesn't make sense to them, it's usually because they're connecting it to something else that they know, and what they know doesn't make sense with what you're presenting to them. So that's the big goal of education, is helping students overcome that through the learning experiences that we provide them. And then lastly, the brain needs an opportunity to connect that new learning to long-term memory. And that usually happens when we give students an opportunity to make application of what they've just learned in a new setting or to a real world context. So if that's how we learn, we want to make sure that the learning experiences are equitable for all students by presenting instruction that does sort of those three layers of work. Oftentimes generic design elements like content, lesson design, products, or activities, they often reflect the cultural and linguistic values and learning styles of the curriculum authors or the teachers. So we have to be really cautious about the materials we're presenting and ensure that we're looking for some of those inherent biases that may be present, or those things that may be present that are attending to just one culture or to our own cultures and ways of learning. So that's something we have to consistently sort of think about. So again, here are a couple of maybe reflection questions you can ask about the curriculum you're vetting or the OER materials you're vetting. Are the content and practices aligned to standards? Is the content represented in ways that access students' prior knowledge? Does the content connect to student interests and identities? Are there multiple ways for students to process information or multiple ways for students to express what they've learned? If your curriculum that you're pulling down does these things, you can pretty much assure that it is attending to equity. And if it's not, then you have to insert or modify the lesson or the curriculum to make it more equitable in these ways. So in the slide deck, there will be a few things to look for in your curriculum that respond to those questions. I'm not going to go over those now, but you could take a look at those. I'm going to skip past these slides for the sake of time, but I also wanted to share with you that we have a couple of open education resource projects that we're getting ready to talk about that we are facilitating in the state to support teachers and school districts. And one of the things we're intentional in these studies with these projects is to look at the equity piece of these curriculum. Do they allow students to share their ideas? Do they allow students to feel like what they're learning matters? Do they understand, or can they see a connection between what they're learning and how it impacts people in their city or town? Those are all things you can look for in your curriculum, and even survey your students about as you're implementing the curriculum. And that'll give you a good sense as to whether or not the curriculum is static or whether it's really attending to your students' interests and identities. And the whole question of when will I use this, or why does it matter? So we wanted to share with you today a few ways that you can evaluate curriculum. Achieve provides a rubric that allows you to specifically evaluate OER materials. And I just want to quickly go to the rubric. I know Becky and Christine will likely share this in the chat as well, the link to the rubric. But there are many different categories associated with the rubric that would allow you to evaluate the OERs you're taking a look at. One aspect of the rubric focuses solely on accessibility. So that's an important part of the OERs as well. So you may want to take a look at that rubric and see the ways in which it encourages you to evaluate these materials based on accessibility. Another space where you can go to find evaluated materials, materials that have already been evaluated, and OER materials that have been evaluated, is through the Ed Reports website. Ed Reports provides a very rich evaluation process on materials, both cost and OER materials. If you're on the Ed Reports website, you can go to any of these grade levels or areas. They've currently reviewed math and ELA, and they're starting to review science. But you can take a look at, let's say, ELA at 3rd through 8th grade, and you can see a list of materials, again, both vendor-based or cost and OERs, and it'll tell you sort of the quality of those materials. Again, here's a list here. I'm gonna go to one specific report out on a curriculum. This is an OER curriculum from Engage New York at 6th grade. And you'll notice that there's a lot of information for us here as teachers about this curriculum. How focused in it is it? How coherent is it? What are the standards that it aligns to? You can get the full report on Ed Reports, and it'll really take a lot of that work away from you as far as deep evaluation. You can read the reports and get a lot of information in this way. Sorry, I had a little glitch in my system here on my side. You can also find other vetted materials evaluation processes through Louisiana Believes. This is Louisiana State Department of Education's effort to evaluate curriculum materials. If you take a look at this website, you'll see for many of the instructional materials for early childhood, literacy, mathematics, science, social studies, they have brought together teachers in Louisiana to evaluate curriculum, both cost and OER curriculum. And there is a tiered system by which they evaluate these curriculums. So tier 1 being the top level, tier 2 being the middle level, and tier 3 being sort of the level that is least conducive to high quality materials. And when you take a look at any of these evaluations that have been done, let's take a look. I'm going to scroll down at maybe math K through 5 here, an example. If you take a look at the evaluation that's been done, remember this was a team of teachers in Louisiana that came together to look deeply at the materials. You're going to see that they have specific criteria that you may be interested in, certainly alignment to standards, focus of work, coherence, consistency. But I think one of the most valuable parts is right over here, you'll see justification from these teachers about how the material is or is not high quality. Again, there are several OER resources listed, full curriculums listed, that you can take a look at these evaluations that are here. And then lastly, from Washington State Department of Education, they bring together educators to review specifically full OER curriculums or units. So here with the Washington State Department of Education, you could take a look at their math reviews for full OER curriculums. And they have a scale all the way up to 12 based on that equip rubric that we saw earlier. So you can see some of the materials that have the higher ratings. Again, you want to take a look for your purposes at what makes sense for the curriculum that you're choosing, the OER resources you're pulling down. But we believe all three of these spaces can provide you opportunities to investigate the materials more deeply and get some information from others who have evaluated these materials. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions in the chat box that you might have related to these evaluation tools. And give you just a little bit of time to look through some of them. I know Christine has put a lot of these materials in the chat box, so you have the direct links. You'll also have the presentation, which has links to all of these resources. So I think what we're going to do for the sake of time is, if we have time, we're going to come back and do some of the chat interaction related to these. But I do want to get to focusing on some of our Oklahoma projects related to OER, so you have access to those. So I'm going to scroll down just a little bit and get to our Oklahoma projects. We are invested at the State Department of Education in supporting our teachers and school districts in the state with open education quality resources. So here are some of the projects we've been working on to support you all with that. The first is a middle school curriculum, Open SciEd, that's currently being developed. Becky, I'm going to click on the Open SciEd website. If you want to talk a little bit about these materials, I'll navigate the website for you, but it might be helpful for folks to hear from you since you've had direct experience with this particular OER curriculum.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so yeah, the great thing about Open SciEd is it's a huge collaboration between several states, many classrooms, and teachers are implementing. We have a pilot group of teachers in these 10 states that implement and then report back to the developers, and they make the proper revisions. It's been a heavily monitored process from construction to implementation. This site here provides all the materials for free, the text materials for the teacher and the student, facilitating those aspects that Tiffany reported defines quality, really hitting on the student coherence piece. You can find the instructional materials where she is right now, and you can order the kits either directly, or you can reference their materials list if you feel like you can construct your kits in a more affordable manner. They're also even provide open educational resources in the forms of facilitating guides for training at your own district as well. So there are facilitator manuals and presentations, all available there, videos to show you sample implementation, videos to show you laboratory setup. But the key things that I really like there is that it provides a student-centered, it supports student-centered instruction. So you can see sample responses that indicate a student is moving their thinking forward, et cetera, et cetera. It's definitely up there in the quality. I don't know if I'm hitting all the marks, Tiff, but that's.
Yeah, the only other thing we would share is this group also made an intentional effort in the spring to support teachers who were using this free and open curriculum with ideas for how to move to distance learning with the curriculum. So there are several professional development, recorded professional development modules, which would help a middle school teacher using this curriculum to then adapt for distance learning. So again,
question in the chat about the kits. Are the kits available to check out or just for purchase?
Yeah, so the way it works is there's a space where you can go to. Open SciEd doesn't, they just have a partner that they've worked with that provides the kits at the lowest cost available if you want to purchase the kits. But as Becky mentioned, we have a lot of teachers who just get the supply list and they determine what they already have in their classroom, and then they purchase the other things to supplement the materials. So the question is, do you know if they have plans for high school? They do have plans for high school. They're going to start high school, and they're actually going to start 3rd through 5th grade elementary next year. So it may be a couple of years before the units are available. But the full middle school curriculum will be finished by next summer. Right now there are around 4 or 5 units per grade level available for middle school now. Christine, would you tell us a little bit about Open Up Math?
Sure. So Open Up Resources is an open educational resource for grades 6 through 8. And we actually have a number of these lessons and resources already embedded into our suggested learning progression section of our OK Math frameworks. And so we have done the work to make sure there's alignment to our Oklahoma academic standards, both in those frameworks, and I also have an alignment document, so I'll put my email in the chat, and if you're interested in seeing that alignment, I'd be happy to share those documents. But really that curriculum is based on a problem-solving based approach to mathematics, and it really engages students in those mathematical actions and processes that really help them to become more of a mathematician in their own math identities, but also in their confidence levels. And so very hands-on, very problem-solving based, great offerings for curriculum. And like I said, we've aligned it to our standards.
Yes, and Christine mentioned the Oklahoma Math Frameworks. So this is probably one of the best spaces for our Oklahoma math teachers to go to, all grade levels, if you're looking for high quality open education resources and resources that are sequenced in a way that attends to that coherence or that building purposefully. So if you go to the curriculum frameworks, here we are at 4th grade again for mathematics, and you go to suggested learning progressions, you're going to see that teachers in our state came together to think about, with our standards, what units should you teach and what order makes sense for student learning. And then when you click on a unit, you're going to see a lot of additional information, but you'll see all of the instructional resources. Christine mentioned for middle school, the Open Up resources were leveraged a lot here. But there are all kinds of lessons sequenced purposely, as well as, if we scroll down, I think we'll find, as well as classroom formative assessments that go along with that. So it's one of the best spaces for OER for mathematics in our state, right here on the Oklahoma Math Curriculum Frameworks. A lot of that work has been done for you. All right, I want to go back here and just mention we have a couple of other projects related to mathematics. We're partnering with SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board. They have free curriculum for college-ready math courses. So these are courses that support students in a math course to help them be ready for college mathematics if they're identified as not quite being ready, as well as a new course, which is high school math ready. So this is for that transition between middle school and high school. Both of these full curriculums are available, and we at the State Department of Education provide free professional development in the summertime, right, Christine? That you can access if you are interested in teaching a course like this. The full OER curriculum is available. For our social studies folks, I just wanted to introduce you to the social studies curriculum frameworks. Although there are not specific lessons in the social studies curriculum frameworks, there are a slew of primary sources linked for each specific standard for every grade level. So primary sources that are free and open primary sources that you can use with students in the classroom, as well as instructional tasks or inquiry tasks that teachers in Oklahoma have put together that correspond to those primary resources. Here's an example of the primary sources and secondary sources for one standard provided in the Oklahoma Social Studies curriculum frameworks. In the presentation, we've provided a direct link to all of these projects that we're working on and the resources, but you'll also see some other OER resources that we've compiled that we have seen the reviews on that seem to be very promising for high quality and aligned materials, and we'll continue to look for those. So we're getting a little close to time, and I know we didn't get a chance for you to explore the evaluation tools, but we want to open it up to you for questions in the last 5 minutes of our session. So Becky, if you'll monitor the Whova app, and Christine, if you'll help us in the Zoom chat, what are questions that you may still have related to OERs or the alignment of OERs and high quality curriculum? Any questions that you might have? As you're thinking of your questions, we hope we've provided you with a lot of resources to think about today and a process to use, a couple of processes to use as you're selecting OERs. And seeing no questions, what we'd love to have you reflect on in the chat box then as our final together time is what's one thing that you're taking away from the session today that you feel like you can apply if you're thinking about or using open education resources next year? If you would share that in the chat box so we can all learn and hear from you, that would be great. What's one thing that you're thinking that you're taking away from the session today? Evaluation, rigor, all things to take away. Jennifer asked, where can I access already evaluated materials aligned with standards? A lot of the resources that we just went through, the Oklahoma projects or the additional resources, have gone through that level of vetting.
People really like the rubric. That's like a big takeaway, is that they'll use the rubric to share with other teachers and to evaluate resources themselves.
Yeah. We know that for many of you, this next year is going to look and feel different. And for some of you, you're looking at your existing curriculum and trying to figure out what resources can you find online to really support you in this next year. The thing we want to share with you again is we are working actively in our curriculum frameworks to provide as many resources as possible. But the same will hold true for this year as in any other years. You want to really think about what you're selecting and is it focused for your efforts. The worst thing we can do is spend extra time on things that are not well aligned to the learning goals for our students, particularly this year. And we're going to share all of our contact information in the chat box. You can also find it in the presentation today that I think Christine and Becky will share one more time. But we encourage you to reach out to us. If you or your district are taking on a pretty big effort to really think about OERs, feel free to reach out to us. If you are a teacher who's thinking about doing this work on your own, reach out to us. We'll connect you with some other teachers who are maybe thinking about doing this work. We also want to share with you that if you haven't already signed up for the newsletters that we offer through our curriculum and instruction office, I just put this in the chat box. You can sign up for math, ELA, science, social studies, fine arts, PE and health, gifted and talented, a slew of other newsletters. And that's the best space to find some of the resources that we're finding to share out more broadly in the state is through those newsletters. And we'll continue to provide support specifically this year. If you're feeling a little anxious about this year, I just want to encourage you and say that we know how hard you're working. We know some of the anxieties that you're feeling. Just know that we're going to be here for you as much as possible to support you. And I would encourage you by saying, give yourself a little bit of grace and a break as you enter into this year and you're planning for your instruction. And just know that we're all in this space of doing the very best we can under the circumstances that we're in. We can learn from each other. We can be a community together. So please continue to join us in the spaces we offer for professional development, for virtual meeting opportunities like this, to bring teachers together in Oklahoma to kind of get through this together. So look for those newsletters. Know that we're here for support, and I'm going to stick around for a while for questions. Both Christine and Becky have shared, I believe, the PD certificates already with you for this session. I think that I saw that showing up quite a bit. I love Sherry. It's important to carefully review the standards for the grade level taught with an awareness of what is below and comes next. It's a great takeaway. Thank you all so much for your time today. We appreciate you spending an hour and a half with us and working through some of the technology that we're using to support you in this session today. Again, if you have additional questions, we're going to stick around for a little bit.